Okay, we're live, Simon.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody. We'll do formal introductions in a moment. We're just going to give a few seconds for people to arrive and log in. Currently, there's 272 people joining us, so welcome everyone. We'll see that number climb. We've all put money on how high that number will climb. No, we haven't really, but it will be interesting. But 283 and still going. So a few more seconds and then we will start. Okay, well, we've passed the 300 mark. Welcome to everybody. We should probably start talking before the numbers start dropping, is my suspicion. Welcome to a special edition of SETI Live, Animal Intelligence and the Search for Life Beyond Earth. My name is Simon Steele. I am the Director of Education and Outreach at the SETI Institute in Mountain View, California. We are all in different locations, of course, thanks to the lockdown, but with the wonders of modern technology, we can have this wonderful conversation. I'm going to introduce the two speakers, but just to say that if you do have any questions for the speakers, please enter those into the Q&A. We have people waiting by to write your questions down, and those will be forwarded to the Laurie and Natalie as we go ahead. Also, let us know where you're listening in from. It will be great to see how spread out around the world everybody is, and we'll mention where people are from as well as we move on. So today we have Natalie Cabral. She's an astrobiologist and director of the Carl Sagan Center for Research at the SETI Institute. Welcome, Natalie. And we also have Laurie Marino, who's a neuroscientist, an expert in animal behavior and intelligence, and is founder and president of the Whale Sanctuary Project. Hi, Laurie. Nice to speak to you.
Hi, everyone.
Hi. So we're going to see a movie from the Whale Sanctuary Project a little bit later, and that's, I'm sure, going to raise a lot of questions from the audience. But we're going to keep the conversation broader than that and talk about intelligence, both on Earth and in the universe. But in case people are unfamiliar with these two organizations, I'm going to ask you both to say a little bit about your organizations. Maybe we can start with Natalie. Natalie, if you could tell us a little bit about the SETI Institute and why are you talking to the Whale Sanctuary Project? And I'm going to throw that back then after Laurie. And, Laurie, tell us a little bit about the Whale Sanctuary Project and why on earth are you speaking to the SETI Institute?
Yeah, so and I remember exactly the same question from another colleague of mine who was actually, working on language in apes. And I contacted her for a workshop about intelligence, alien intelligence. And she really didn't understand at the very beginning why in heck, the SETI Institute Director of Science wanted to talk to someone who was looking into ape language. But to address your question, Simon, I'm going to share a few slides just to give an idea to our audience what the SETI Institute is. Let's see, maybe if I can get to it. Apparently, I have a problem here to share. So Lee, if you want to maybe bring up the slides, and I will just direct you to change them. But to get started and not waste too much time, let's say that the SETI, the Carl Sagan Center is the research arm of the SETI Institute, and we are covering the entire Drake equation. Lee, do you have the slides? Can you bring them up I apparently cannot share from here.
Yeah, sorry,
So,
Natalie, give me a minute. I'm trying to
yes,
get
that's
something.
okay. I'll keep going in the meantime. So what we are doing, the mission of the SETI Institute is really to explore, understand, and explain the origin and nature of life in the universe and the evolution of intelligence. And we are doing this across what we call the Drake equation. I'm not going to get into the details of that today. I invite our audience to look into this. But we do this across three main areas. And the first one is cosmology and astrophysics, basically looking at the origin of the universe to the formation of stars. And the other one is planets and habitability. How do you form planets in the solar system and beyond? And how do they become habitable, or why they are not becoming habitable? And then we are looking into life and complexity. Once a planet is habitable, then, you know, what is the origin of life, how life comes to be. So we do this with a number of methods. And in fact, we go across our mission with a number of different methodology. One of them is obviously through planetary and space missions. The other one is ground-based observation. A lot of the SETI research is being done with radio telescopes. We also are going about field expedition terrestrial analogs. How do you understand how a planet becomes habitable? We don't have human exploration yet beyond what we've done in the 60s. And we also are dealing with artificial intelligence, not for the sake of looking at data sets, but also to try and understand whether artificial intelligence is a form of intelligence. Have we been creating God, so to speak, something that thinks faster and is more intelligent than humans? But we're also going through the Drake equation with the humanities, asking the question of nature and origins of life from the philosophy standpoint, or the art for that matter. And we do this across a number of other different arenas. May I have the next slide, please? So what is very important to me, and I put an emphasis on, is really to take what we learn from space and exploration and bringing back to Earth. The tools that we are developing are those that characterize the fingerprints of life. And obviously we're starting from the Earth. And we're trying to apply that to the planets that we explore, and we are developing new instrument and exploration strategies. But we're also using those technology to monitor our own Earth and trying to develop better tools to forecast environmental change and try to help mitigate the issues that are coming from that. The next slide, please. And of course, SETI, who is really the root of the institutes, and we're approaching the question of the search for life in intelligent life and technologies in the universe through two main aspects. The one is the most known of the SETI Institute, which we call SETI Technologies. We are listening for signals, and we're doing this with radio telescopes, but also with laser SETI, looking at flashes of light in the sky. And there is also SETI Intelligence, which is what we're going to talk today about with Laurie, which is mainly to understand who would be behind those communication and those messages. The SETI technology signature is more about, you know, what is there and where is it coming from? Whereas the SETI Intelligence is to understand who's beyond the signal, what kind of intelligence can be out there in the universe. And it's most likely that it's not going to be anything like us. And so that aspect of the SETI research is really where we are starting to tackle different aspects of intelligence. And we're doing this through animal communication, language, and also neuroscience. And this is why Laurie Marino is here. And this is what the director of the Carl Sagan Center is talking to the director of the Whale Sanctuary Foundation project.
Good. Okay, you've made your case. Good. Laurie.
Well, thank you all, and thanks, Natalie. I have some slides, but I'm going to wait till later because they have to do with the film. Hi, everyone. I'm a neuroscientist by training. I study the evolution of the brain and intelligence in a number of different animals, primarily dolphins and whales, primates, and some others as well. And I've been involved with the SETI Institute and the astrobiology community for a long time now, because as Natalie mentioned, I mean, one of the really important elements of this whole area is to understand intelligence. So if you're looking for it somewhere else, you need to understand how it evolved on this planet and the range of ways that intelligence expresses itself on this planet. I've been fortunate enough to be brought into a number of different projects and conferences and talking to people. Natalie and I met a long time ago, but we've since, started to work more closely. And it's really an important part of the whole SETI effort is to understand not only just what's out there and bring it here, but what's here and bring it up there. And to understand what we could expect and what we might be able to predict based upon the way brains and intelligence have evolved on this planet. I'm also the founder and president of the Whale Sanctuary Project, which began in 2016. And that came right out of my work with dolphins and whales and understanding something about how developed their brains are and how poorly their brains fared living in marine parks. And so we are engaged, our team is engaged in developing the first sanctuary for beluga whales and orcas in North America. And the film you'll see later will be about that. But it does definitely relates to the fact that dolphins and whales in captivity are big brains and small tanks. So that's where I'll end.
Okay. Thank you. And obviously we'll come back to the film and talk about that in much more detail later on. I just want to say, and we have such a long list of locations where people are listening to, it'll take up the whole time slot to read them out. But Mexico City, New Zealand, Philadelphia, the Galapagos, San Francisco, Brighton, UK, Ireland, Padua, Italy, Miami, and Florida, to name but a few. And I'll run off a few others as well. And as we said at the beginning, please, if you have any questions, do type them into the Q&A, and we'll pass them on. So our brains, human brains, are a product of 4 billion plus or minus years of evolution. Is intelligence a natural consequence of the development of life? And maybe as a follow-up question, how do we know intelligence when we see it? And that's for anyone. Laurie, do you want to start?
Okay, I'll start. Well, yes, it's true that the human brain is a product of billions of years of evolution. What is intelligence? Well, we're never going to come to a consensus on a definition. It's almost as though intelligence is what intelligence does. What I can tell you is that when you look at the landscape of intelligence on this planet, brains, nervous systems, how different organisms process information, we find that the human brain is really quite ordinary and is really a consequence of many millions of years, billions of years, if you will, of evolution on this planet. And intelligence can be found everywhere. I think a good definition of intelligence might be the ability to process information about your environment and to act on it. If that's the case, then very, very simple organisms have intelligence.
Natalie, have you got anything to comment on? No, okay.
No, I was muted and I could not unmute it. I had
issues to comment. That's a
yeah, I had issues with the question. Can you repeat the question?
Sure. Really, it's just the basic one is how do we know intelligence? I mean, how do we recognize intelligence when we look? And I know you can take that at multiple levels as the biological aspect, but it's almost a philosophical question. What are your feelings?
You know, you can tackle it like any question by through different perspective. And there is no, just like life, actually, there is not one definition for intelligence. And probably, I would say not just for life, that can take us in a different direction, but is there a need for a definition for intelligence? I mean, intelligence is really, you know, what you study at any time. If you think that intelligence is everywhere, like I do, it's really not a matter of a definition, but what aspect of intelligence you want to look at. And the reason I'm saying that is because when you're looking at life on Earth, any species, and I mean from the most evolved to the smallest of microbes that made it up to here, have some form of smart about surviving, about adapting, about you know, dealing with its environment. To me, here is already a definition of intelligence. It might be a reactive intelligence. It might be, you know, a skilled intelligence, but it is a way for life to survive. So if one definition of intelligence is to be able to make it no matter what, you know, life or environment throws at you, then intelligence is everywhere. It's just a matter for us to be able to communicate or understand what it is, not so much of, you know, what is intelligence.
I mean, it really turns out that if you look across all the organisms on this planet, there's not a single organism that evolved without a nervous, some way of processing information about the world that also, I mean, that moves around. So there's something about moving around that seems to be very important for the evolution of nervous systems, because you have to navigate your way through the world. And single-celled organisms do that. And they do that using the same electrochemical principles by which our brains actually work. So, you know, once we hit on that principle, it was just used over and over and over again in the evolution of nervous systems.
Yeah. I mean, we always say, you know, there are examples of life on Earth, and then we need to think about what we look for life on other worlds, on exoplanets. And we're saying that it's not going to be anything like life on Earth. And yet, if you treat the concept of, say, intelligence and what you mean by life in the broadest sense, then yes, I mean, there is going to be this overlap, even though they may not have the same number of limbs as us. What commonality do you think can you stress throughout the cosmos if you are looking for life and intelligence?
Natalie?
Yeah, I'll take this one. At least I'll start with it. Simon, you're hitting here on the principle of coevolution. And it's a fact that all life, and I mean absolutely all life here on Earth, is the product of 4.5 billion years of coevolution, well, 4 billion years of coevolution between life and environment. So what does that mean is that the planet is formed, and it's giving the physical chemical parameters within which life is going to be able to evolve. So you already have an envelope here, and that has some limitation on what kind of chemistry and physics are going to be able to be applied. But then once life comes about, then it changes everything, because it starts to interact with its environment, it's modifying the environment, etc. And it's a cycle, you know, and it goes on and on and on. Life modifies the environment environment modifies life. It's a system. That's why we call it an ecosystem. And this is why we are one unit. It's totally wrong to think that we are outside this ecosystem. Whatever we put in the system is going to come back to us, whether to bite us or to make our life good. It's true that every single planet, every single world, it's going to be a unique planetary experiment. Having said that, and we can see this on Earth, there might be convergence of solutions. But we should be careful. And of course, I'm going to make a very big statement, which probably Laurie is going to shut down really fast because I'm not a neuroscientist. But I think we should be careful in overgeneralizing here, because what we see on Earth and those convergence are really the product of convergence and solution that are coming from the same planet and from, 4 billion years of parallel evolution. So if you tell me, I really truly believe that there probably are universal principles that life, as Laurie said, the more you move, the more you explore, the more your neural system is going to be developed. See, Laurie, I've been listening to you. So you are going to see some convergence somewhere, but that doesn't mean that, it has to be the same. It's not necessary that alien life will have legs or will have anything that we know of.
Sure.
But I do agree that, a planet is going to develop a number of solutions that its own. And the closest they are to the Earth, maybe the closest we might be to see some convergence of response to the environment. And then I will leave it to Laurie, because otherwise we are going to dwell into science fiction.
Well, no, I hear what you're saying. And actually convergence is something that's been talked about a lot in SETI, right? This idea that, two different evolutionary lines, become functionally similar because of similar selection pressures in the environment. But actually, when you look, right, what is convergence? It's all relative, right? Because there's really no actual convergence, because we have a common ancestor with all life on this planet. So convergence is relative. People talk about, primate brains and bird brains, for instance, and some of the convergence that occurred neurologically, functionally. Yeah, that's true. But you know what? When you really, at another level, bird brains and primate brains are different versions of the same brain. So convergence is really a relative concept when you're talking about organisms on this planet. We do intelligence all pretty much the same way, and we just tweak it as we go along.
Yeah, exactly. I think this is just a variation, just like music. You're taking
Variation
the theme and you're expanding it depending on the different type of environments and the adaptations to those changes.
Exactly.
It's interesting. We've got a question here from Carol saying, some people say that even trees communicate. Do you agree with that? And now we're talking about communication and intelligence. And you say there's obviously, again, we've got a sample size of 1 when it comes to life in the universe. But how do you relate communication? Is there the same convergence of methods of communication? Because obviously how we communicate with different species on Earth is in a sense trying to give us an understanding of how we may be able to communicate with extraterrestrials.
Yeah. Well, I'll just start and say, trees do communicate with each other. The question of whether they do that consciously or with the same level of awareness that animals do is a question that remains unanswered, right? So I would say that, there's where you see a communication. Depends upon what you mean. You mean intentional communication, or do you just simply mean one organism influencing another organism, for instance?
So yeah, and Laurie just threw a very, very big word in the conversation, which is consciousness here. So we can go back to that now.
We're trying to hold back on the C word, because there's a few
questions. That's where it always comes to, right?
Absolutely. This is what it comes to. You see trees, there is what we call the wood wide web. And this was a very, very nice story out of an article, a scientific article. There is communication in the forest, in nature. Plants communicate, everything communicates. And there too, we can go back to that. But if you reduce everything to energy and information, which we are, then yes, we do communicate at a level we don't even understand right now with the universe and everything that's around us. In terms of consciousness, again, intentional communication, it seems that trees have the ability to actually, kill those they don't want to be around. And if a tree wants to grow, it will do whatever it takes to get rid of whatever is around and it doesn't want. So is there intent? I don't know. But, so this conversation will very, very quickly expand into questions of consciousness in terms of complexity. And ultimately, again, if you are stepping back far away enough, it all comes down to what it is the universe is. And
Right.
So that goes back to, what we are made of, what are dolphins and trees made of. And so this is about the unification of,
Exactly.
of the evolution of life and the nature, to me, which is even more important, the nature of life in the universe.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree.
An interesting question has come up, and Rebecca McDonald, our Director of Communications, is forwarding these questions and being very kind to us, I think. There's lots of questions coming up very relevantly about viruses. Viruses, almost, whether they're alive, whether they're not. I mean, there's almost a sort of robotic purpose, in a sense, a sort of natural AI in how they function. As the questions have come up, any comments on viruses as systems and how do they fit in?
Well,
sorry, Laurie.
No.
I was just going to say, and I will stop that because, this is not my area. I'm not a medical doctor, etc. But you have to think of it where it's relevant to our discussion today is that you have to think of it as a piece of code. And this is why we also talk about virus when we're talking, computing. And what that does is that it actually scrambles, destroy or modify the information that's supposed to be running in the original piece of code. So it, to be a little blunt, it messes up the communication and how it should flow. So this is how you can, really understand that in a very simple way. And the solution to viruses are patches, but to get a patch, you need to understand what the virus is about and how it modifies your communication flow.
Yeah, I mean, I don't. Viruses are strange. It's on everyone's mind now, and they're sort of on the margin of I guess what we recognize as life, and maybe they represent a signal that life is not a bright line in nature. I don't see them as intelligent, but I don't see AI as intelligent either. I think AI is the kind of thing that is a very, very complex tool. But as I've said many times before, we need not be afraid of them getting to the point where they want to take over the planet, because that requires motivation, and you have to be a living organism to have motivation. So that's my view.
Let's talk about communication and intelligence. Obviously, we are communicating species, humans, and we can also develop technology to communicate, from one planet to another. Whales, arguably, and Laurie can say, in many ways have a much more sophisticated intelligence than us, but they are not building radio telescopes at the moment, as far as we know. So, when we are communicating, or when we want to communicate with life on other worlds at great distances, it's quite possible that the majority of species in the universe are intelligent, but not communicative over long distances. Or are they? Is there any way you can see a boundary here to reach to identify these types of intelligences?
All right.
Emily?
Want me to get started?
Yeah.
So this is a conversation that's happening right now, especially, since the discovery of exoplanet, we're expanding the gallery of worlds that we're discovering. One thing is sure, I think that it's pretty, it's okay to make this a universal principle, is that simple systems are going to be extremely easy to put together, much more than complex systems. So I do not believe, just because of the sheer number of planets that we're discovering and the sheer number of galaxies that there are in the universe, it would be a nonsense, a statistical nonsense, to think that life is not out there. And one of my favorite quotes is just to say that probably the universe is full of cyanobacteria, because this, the elements that make cyanobacteria on Earth are very, very abundant everywhere. And they are very simple, and they showed up very, very fast on our planet. But as you go, and you're trying to build a more complex system, then it takes more time. And the more time that you are, trying to do things, then you have stochastic events that can happen, et cetera, et cetera. Now I lose my track. Can you ask me the question again, Simon?
Just thinking about ways to,
the communication.
Communication, yes.
So the point was that most of life in the universe is most likely very simple, just for the sake of statistical consideration, and only because when you see patterns and what I call the Mandelbrot universe, this is the same thing. Patterns repeat, but it's a lot easier to make simple things than bigger things. So cyanobacteria, one could think that they can communicate. They are not building telescopes, right? They can communicate. They cannot communicate unless you speak cyanobacteria, which we are starting to do fairly well. And what that means, that when you have enough of these living organisms at the surface of a planet, they are going to start doing things to your atmosphere. And they are going to start doing what they did on Earth, which is to change it and inject oxygen. And so what we are trying to learn right now is really to understand the cycles and patterns of that type of communication. Obviously, this is not a SETI signal. This is not a signal loaded with philosophy, but we're capable of, or we will soon be capable of saying, hey, we have cyanobacteria saying hello here, because we can see that spectrum in their atmosphere. And then, as life evolves and changes, you are looking at those disequilibria in atmospheres, because life creates a lot of that. What you have to learn is to extract the biological background from the geological environment of the planet. So this is one thing. And then obviously there is ET. So ET depends again, and that will be for Laurie, the type of intelligence, who is behind, is this intelligence coming of what type of environment, what type of planet, what type of light, what type of, So there will be different type of signals. Some of them will be radio telescope signals, some might be light signal, others might be spectra in the atmosphere. At this point in time, what is interesting to me is to discuss with Laurie about, what happens when you have very, very intelligent beings like whales and dolphins who are underwater, and you have a water world. So how will we know that they are here?
Yeah, what's interesting is that I think that we are all somewhat, not entirely, but somewhat thrown off by the fact that dolphins and whales have big brains and they are fully aquatic. And the reason I say that is because it leads us to think that there is some kind of a direct relationship between being fully aquatic and being very complex and big brained. In fact, when you look at the evolution of dolphin brains, which we have, you note that there is an uncoupling there. So their ancestors were in the ocean swimming around for 10 or 15 million years before anything changed in terms of their brain size or shape. something happened about 35 million years ago, 30 to 35 million years ago, that produced a tremendous selection pressure on them, if you will. And that led to a big change in the brain, body size, their teeth. They started to develop high frequency processing, not full echolocation yet, but some. And so there was something else there that presented itself as a selection pressure. So it's not just, add water, get intelligence. It's what is happening in that water. And a lot of people think that it might have to do with social ecology and how they're able to protect themselves in a group. And then we can start to see that there are similarities between how, for instance, primates and dolphins and whales did evolve their large brains. One in the water, one in, on land, but maybe that's only one kind of difference. There could be more similarities than there are actual differences, depending upon how you look at it.
Yeah, my remark was more tuned towards, how would we know if we were watching an ocean world, that they are there. There you would have highly intelligent beings.
That's right. That's right.
And so this is all this aspect of intelligence that can stay under the radar for us.
It is. And so we are so interested in getting a signal, right? An electromagnetic signal. But there could be complex intelligence everywhere. And it could be more complex, more intelligent in the sense than the radio telescope using species. And that's what we see, on this planet, that there's lots of complex intelligence, but unless we have a way to probe it and to recognize it, we're not going to know it's there. But that doesn't mean that isn't the important question for understanding or predicting whether or not we're going to find intelligence on another planet. We have to somehow ask the question in a very pure way, what happens on any planet in terms of the intelligence. And it turns out that intelligence formed very, very early in the evolution of life on this planet, and it's everywhere. So I agree with you. I mean, we have to understand not just the telescope using ones, but everybody.
Yeah, and I do believe that a lot of new methods, very promising methods, also reside in your field of expertise, which is neuroscience.
Exactly.
Right now, we're understanding so much more about brains and neural systems, and struck me as well to see how our brain. Actually, the reality we perceive is actually the reality that our brain is capable of perceiving. So, that's another discussion for how an alien brain would perceive reality, and if it has anything in common with us, that actually goes directly towards intelligent alien intelligence, but also how we are capable of constructing in our brain a reality at 11 dimensions when we are actually living in a world of 3 dimension and time. Mm-hmm. So it is fascinating, absolutely fascinating. And to me, I do believe that really the bridge between astrobiology, traditional astrobiology, which really dealing more with the question of habitability and, the inception of life, and SETI, looking at communication and radio telescope, intelligence is the bridge here, because we need to understand, what is intelligence or the many forms, because the way you perceive the world is the way you are going to communicate about the world. And if we want to understand what kind of message or how this message is going to be packaged, we absolutely need to understand that. And it may be that radio telescopes are not the only way of searching for alien intelligence.
Probably not. But it's, we use the tools that we have, right?
Absolutely. We have to start
tools we don't have, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So I agree.
Well, talking of life on other worlds, I think we had a poll, didn't we, that we wanted to do? And Lee is going to put up a poll in a second with a question. Do you believe that we will find life beyond Earth, and of any form, whether it's these cyanobacteria colonies or intelligent aliens and whales flying spaceships? Have a go and type in those numbers, and we'll see what sort of audience we have.
That's not fair. We cannot do it.
We can't vote.
No, we can.
Well, we already have a chance to vote by talking.
I was thinking now it's coming up to 40 minutes, Laurie, and I wondered if now's a good time maybe to introduce your movie. Maybe you'd like to say a little bit about it in advance, and as the film is playing, that'll give people a chance to watch it and ask more questions, and then we can come back to that discussion. So
well, thank you. Thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to show this film. The film is just 5 minutes long, and the film is called Whales Without Walls. And it's a film that describes how the Whale Sanctuary Project why the Whale Sanctuary Project is so committed to creating a better life for captive whales and dolphins, and how we're going to create a sanctuary in Nova Scotia. And I can show you a photo of it. It relates to our discussion because we wouldn't be talking about why we have to get dolphins and whales out of concrete tanks if it weren't for the fact that when they're in concrete tanks, the environment doesn't match what their brains need. Because their brains evolved over millions, tens of millions of years to have certain type of input. When they don't have that, the system breaks down. So it's quite germane to the fact that animals need to live in the environment that they evolved in. And how can we help them do that? So I'm going to share my screen and show it, and then we can get back to it.
I've had many experiences with orcas off the south coast of Iceland. And there you got to see them in their natural environment. You got to see them majestic in every way. They're wide-ranging predators, traveling 100 miles a day and diving as much as 300 feet to forage. And they live in tightly knit family groups, often not leaving their birth family the whole lives. And in many of these families, the moms call all the shots.
We're talking about a level of emotional bonding that is beyond the par of what we experience as humans. Feelings and emotions come into play in orca and cetacean psychology in a very intense and very fundamental way. They have culture, they have dialects, they have interesting communication systems and a big brain. They're right up there with us. When you look at the orca brain through an MRI image, the neocortex, the thinking part of the brain, the gray matter, is actually more convoluted than that of the human brain. For a brain like that, there is nothing to do in a concrete tank.
There are actually 3,000 whales and dolphins in captivity around the world. There are 57 orca, more than 300 beluga, and they live in very small tanks, often not any deeper than the whales are long.
A concrete tank is like an auditory hall of mirrors. At first, they're going to get back a lot of echoes, and eventually
they're going to realize there's nothing to echolocate on. And at that point, they simply shut down.
And in captivity, they live in artificial families. Mothers and calves are separated based solely on commercial interest. Captive whales rarely live more than 20 years. Fewer than 50% lived more than 4 years after capture. The captive industry makes the point that they're providing education about orcas to all of their audiences.
I think it's anti-educational. It teaches kids that we as humans should dominate them, as opposed to anything about what they are as animals, what their culture is.
The reason China and other countries are capturing orcas and other cetaceans and putting them in concrete tanks is because of the success of marine parks in this country.
One could lose hope. One could say there are more and more animals being captured, and the numbers we have today will be nothing compared to what could happen in the future. But we have to put our hope in children to stand up and say no, and will demand of their parents, no matter where they live on the planet, that we treat these animals with understanding and care and keep them in the wild. As the public ethic around keeping whales and dolphins in captivity changes, people are demanding that the shows stop and that the animals have an opportunity to live in more natural environments. Most of the animals today in captivity were born in captivity. So releasing them would be in many ways tragic because they do not have the skills to survive in the wild. The best solution is to build natural seaside sanctuaries where captive whales and dolphins can live in an environment as close to their natural habitat as we can provide. They'll have a sandy bottom with critters, fish, and crabs with whom to interact. They'll have birds on the surface to chase. And they will have space, more than 300 times more than the largest performance tank in captivity.
The captivity industry is looking at us. The public has the power to end this suffering.
Sanctuaries have been built for elephants, for gorillas, and big cats. And now is the time to create sanctuaries for whales and dolphins.
There is another way. Here it is.
That's it.
Thank you, Laurie. And of course, we'll post all of the links to the Whale Sanctuary and to this video on the SETI Institute website, so you can follow up on that. And I like maybe Natalie to comment on this as well, but it just reminds me, you know, of a lot of this fear that we have in alien movies where the aliens come down and treat us as scientific experiments as if we're a lower form of life. And it seems as though that's what we're doing to the whales and the dolphins. It's
and you know, this is not, it's not by accident that we are making those movies, because this is the way we act and this is what's in our psyche. I think that, you know, obviously this movie is touching on a nerve of a adolescent civilization, which we are. We have a lot of technology. Right now we are very arrogant about who we are as a civilization. We do have lots of tools. We don't have enough experience yet to understand the consequences of our action. I think we see that every day. And so we still have to respect the biosphere around us and understand that we are part of it, and treat, you know, whoever is around us, whatever the size, with respect and dignity. And this is not what's happening with the dolphin. I think that, you know, I have a little bit of a problem to just narrow down the issues of captivity and brain size. Captivity is unacceptable, you know, whatever the size. Of course, intelligent species are the target of that because, oh, well, you know, they are making up for a good show. And so, but it's more of a, we have to expand that dialogue to really who we are at this point in time, who we want to be in a generation or two, and what kind of planet we want to live in, and how we want to get this communication going on our own planet with all the different species, you know, at the same time as we want to expand and talk to other species. So to go back to your question, yes, of course, we are projecting our own fears and our own behavior in the science fiction that we are writing. That's not extraordinary to me, but there is another message, you know, behind this, which is that it's time for us to treat our own next of kin, because whoever is on this planet is a next of kin. We are one family, and we're starting to understand that with respect and dignity.
And I couldn't agree more. And I think that what we're starting to see is as people start to realize that we haven't always treated other animals with respect and dignity, that we have an opportunity to do better. We have an opportunity to make up for that. We made mistakes and now we can move on. So the sanctuary for whales is just one example of how people are starting to realize that, you know, we need to make up for not having the best relationship with our kin, as you say, and that we are capable of doing that, and we can.
You know, and I agree with you that, you know, it's not all negative. I mean, it's okay, so to speak, to make mistakes, because just we didn't know, we didn't have the knowledge that it was there. But as we are getting greater knowledge about this becomes more and more unacceptable not to do something.
Exactly. That's where science and knowledge comes in. Very important.
So a question from Frank talking about learning the language of whales and dolphins communicating. Can we do this in a way that respects their freedom and their sort of dignity? You know, what are the ways that scientists, now knowing about the intelligence of whales and dolphins, how's the best way to learn from them and to try and communicate?
Well, I think that first of all, you know, it's a great question. It's a $6 million question, and there's lots of ways. And the first thing is to allow that other animal to be in the environment that he or she needs to be in to thrive. Because as much as we've learned from dolphins and whales in concrete tanks, and we have learned a lot, it tells us very little about what they actually are like in the ocean when they're living their lives. And now, you know, and now there is a lot of work being done. Well, there always has been field work being done, looking at how whales communicate with each other in the wild, amongst their families. And we're the cutting edge in cetacean science right now is in field research, because without that, we wouldn't know that they are cultural. We wouldn't know that they have dialects. We wouldn't know that they use tools. There's all kinds of things we wouldn't know about them. So there's a lot of ways that we can do non-invasive scientific investigation of whales and dolphins and other animals and how they communicate. And we plan to do that in the sanctuary as well.
So Laurie, I want to add to what you're saying, and just to say that maybe because for the past, you know, many decades, if not more, we had animals in captivity, intelligent animals in captivity. That might be our chance. And I'll go back to the wonderful book by Roger Fouts, Washoe. Yeah. And Roger, you know, took care of apes and was one of the first one to teach them American Sign Language. And so in doing so, he learned a good deal. He saved a number of them and learned a good deal about their culture. But at the same time, what happened is that one of the mother, for the very first time, actually taught her baby the American Sign Language without any human interfering with that. She made the conscious decision to teach that language.
Yep.
And, you know, so this might be our chance to plant seeds in a way that we can, you know, probably expand our communication range with the animals that we have in captivity, unfortunately right now, but little by little, let them just go back to their natural environment in the generations to come.
And I think we'll learn a lot more from them and about them when they're in their natural environment. So I agree with you. Yeah.
Laurie, this is a question from Daniel, and it leads in perhaps to one of the questions I would have asked you at the end is, what's the future for the sanctuary? And he's asking, you know, how natural an environment will this be? Will the animals breed? And if so, will the calves be released into the wild, or is this a closed system forever?
Yeah, that's a good question. And a sanctuary is a place where we're trying to get the residents as close as possible to a natural life and everything that means. That's the priority. But unfortunately, there are restrictions on that because most of the animals come from, they're born into tanks. Because they're so intelligent, they never learned to hunt. They never learned that a live fish was food. All kinds of things like that. So to just open the gates and let them swim into the sunset would be cruel. They wouldn't make it. So what can we do? We can provide an environment that is orders of magnitude better than a concrete tank. Get them as close as possible to what they need to thrive, and then use that to phase out keeping them in entertainment parks altogether. We won't be breeding them. And the reason we won't be is because we don't want to make more captive animals. We want eventually to go out of business. And so there are some things that, you know, we can't give them, but what we can give them is orders of magnitude better than what they have now.
Just to round things up, because we're coming up to the hour, Natalie, what would you like Laurie's work and the work, you know, the understanding of different intelligences on the Earth, how is that going to influence the way that the SETI Institute moves forward in its philosophy?
It already is, Simon. The steps were taken, the first steps were taken a couple of years back. And so this is the expansion of the idea of the SETI search, something that I mentioned in passing a few minutes ago, which is really the focus on SETI intelligence. And so for me, as an astrobiologist and searching for life in the beyond Earth, I am extremely interested in understanding, you know, what are the hurdles in communicating with intelligent species on our own planet who have been evolving like us on the same planet for 4 billion years. How difficult is that? It's not a simple thing at all. You know, that's why I was talking to Mary Lee John Volt with the apes, because they are our next of kin. And it's not that simple at all. Exactly. So what can we learn from that? We can also learn a gallery of intelligence or neural systems. We can learn more about the diversity of intelligence on our own planet and learn more the influence of environment on our own planet. So this is directly relevant to the search for life beyond Earth and the search for intelligent life. And this is expanding the realm of the SETI search. And I think that, to me, neuroscience, you know, is really an area that I want to explore a lot more. And so we're not done. Laurie and I, we're just barely started. And I am going to look more and more into neuroscience and the different tools and methodology that they are providing. And at the same time, maybe, you know, it's a two-way avenue, maybe suggest some tools that we're developing for planetary exploration and space exploration. We already talked about that with Laurie, to not only look for intelligence, but also support the monitoring and forecasting of the future of intelligence on Earth.
Mhm. Yes.
And Laurie, you said that your ambition was to go out of business, basically. Once that happens, which we hope will be, during our lifetimes or the lifetime of the current generation of
Maybe the coming generations. It'll be a long time. There are a lot of dolphins and whales sitting in tanks right now.
Yeah. How do you see your work expanding, and how do you see that tying in again with the concept of intelligence in a broader, in a universal sense?
Well, again, I think, obviously this is the Sanctuary Project is a project that is going to go on way past all of our lifetimes, because these animals live so long. And, if we can't solve this problem overnight. But it also presents, is embedded in this whole world of interest that I have in other brains, other consciousnesses, and how we can relate to them. And the Sanctuary Project is all about changing how we relate to this other complex intelligence on this planet. And as Natalie said, I find our conversations, my conversations and involvement with the SETI Institute to be so important, because they stimulate out-of-the-box ways of thinking about how can we probe intelligence on other, not on just other planets, but here on this planet, and go back and forth. And it's just, an exciting landscape of opportunity.
Would you say mind-boggling?
Mind-boggling. Yes.
Mind-boggling.
Yes.
That is a good word to end with. I'd like to thank everybody for tuning in for this amazing discussion that I think is just the beginning rather than a one-off of these conversations. The SETI Institute does do a lot of conversations with its scientists, and we would love everybody to join in that conversation. Please do check out our website and check out the Whale Sanctuary website as well. We'll put a lot of links onto our site for things that we have discussed. Somebody asked about good books that you would recommend in all of these subjects, and maybe we'll assemble a bibliography for people to look as well, and put that up as we move forward.
I would just add, Simon, that we have a few links already that we provided that can be posted for the audience, just as an introduction, maybe.
Good.
Great.
Well, thank you both. Thank you, Laurie. Thank you, Natalie.
Thank
you,
you.
everyone.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Nat.
We will see you all soon. Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.